morning to all. I'm Tomas Serebrisky. I'm the manager of infrastructure and energy at the IDB. So, good morning and welcome to this session on how climate change is reshaping the future of transport in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is a pleasure for me to be back at the World Bank, meet so many friends and colleagues, as well as address this distinguished audience of policymakers in the transportation sector. So I'd like to I promise I'll make short remarks, but I'd like to thank the World Bank and the World Resource Institute for the opportunity to host a session with particular focus on Latin America and the Caribbean, one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change. And at the same time, a region that faces two very important challenges. One is very low economic growth and very, very high inequality. So what does this mean for the transport sector in Latin America? And to answer this question, the IDB released very recently a comprehensive report for Latin America on the state, challenges and opportunities for mitigating transport-related emissions, as well as adapting transport infrastructure and services to the effects of climate change. And my colleague, Ana Maria Pinto, the IDB Transport Division Chief, will summarize in a few minutes the main policy messages of this report. So at the IDB, we are committed to support our member countries in making transportation a catalyzer for sustainable development. Very recently, the IDB approved a new institutional strategy that has three main pillars: climate change, poverty reduction and inequality, and bolster economic growth. And I'm sure we will all agree that transportation is key to overcome this triple challenge that the region faces. Let me give you a few examples from projects in our region, like BRTs and metro lines that, by the way, most of them are co-financed with the World Bank, are increasing access to jobs, hospitals, schools for vulnerable communities, while at the same time reducing cars in our congested streets. Electric buses are helping reduce pollution in a region that 150 million people live in areas with poor air quality standards out of 600 million in total. And climate-proofed infrastructure is enhancing the resilience of critical networks in a context with higher frequency of extreme weather events. However, the magnitude of the challenges we face as a region are really huge. We need to do more, but also better and faster. In the case of climate change, and as Ana Maria will show you next, we don't have much time left to set the sector into the right path to achieve the goals of Paris Agreement. But we do have the power to change course. Embracing sustainable transport solution is not just an option. Now it's clear that it's an imperative. Electric vehicles, public transit, hiking also, but biking, walking. Hiking is also good for health. Walking and innovations in fuel efficiency offer promising pathways to reduce emissions and mitigate the effect of climate change. So then the key is to invest much more in public transport infrastructure, because it not only reduces emissions, but also promotes social equity and economic growth. So by prioritizing sustainable transport policies and technologies, we can create cleaner, healthier, and more resilient communities for generations to come. So the message I want to share with you today is that we need to act now on the IDB, jointly with the World Bank and NGOs, all institutions that care about quality of life and transport are ready to partner with you in this endeavor. So thank you, and I pass the word on to you, Ana Maria.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you, Tomas, for your opening remarks, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the interest in what's happening in transport in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I want as well to thank the World Bank and the WRI for giving us this space to talk about this very important topic, which is decarbonization and green transition for the transport sector. And I would like to start by something that for us that are here is I would say a no-brainer, something that we assume, but that is very important to remind that transportation has an essential role for connecting communities, improving lives, access to jobs, and for the function of our society. And why I say this and why we start by highlighting this, because sometimes when we talk about how to embrace climate change and mitigation, sometimes transport is seen as the bad actor or something that could be avoided. And we always must remind that this is essential service for our society, and from the transport sector have to keep advocating for this. But at the same time, we must recognize that we bring challenges to our societies, or the transport has many challenges for our society. One that we must not forget is the huge impact that has on road fatalities and injuries, and that how by moving every day, lots of our citizens put their lives in danger. The second, and no less important, is how transport as well sometimes is a barrier for better opportunities for vulnerable populations. And the third one, between many challenges that we have, is the one that brings us today, is that transport accounts for an important percentage, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, that means that we account for 40% of the total of emission of greenhouse emission in the sector. So that means that in particular, we need to act regarding this important externality or effect that transport has for our societies. So our analysis show that in the last decades, the emissions of the transport sector in Latin America and the Caribbean, although we just account now for 8% of the total emissions, 40% being that by transport, has grown exponentially compared with other regions. And most important, our projections show that if we keep doing what we're doing, even with the actions that we are already undertaking, these emissions will keep growing by at least 70% if we don't do something radical. So that means that we will not fulfill our commitment by 2050 to halve the emissions, but they will keep growing, and as a conservative estimation means that that will grow by 70%. So that for Latin America and the Caribbean means that we need a fundamental change in many aspects, and at the same time we need to take action by our authorities, but as well by all the actors in the society. So as Thomas said, it's time to take action and to do fundamental and structural change in the next 2 years. Among the many changes that we need, that we advise in the governments to prioritize, and not just the governments, of course, because this is a responsibility of the society, we are concentrating 4 strategic pillars or areas that we need to concentrate. One, and it's very important to start from there, is how we include the climate change agenda on transport plans and policies. And why is this important? And we still see a gap. Some countries are more developed than the others, and that's why Minister Munoz is here. But we still see a gap between transport planning and policies and the climate change agenda. So we need to bridge that gap and don't make that converge and complementary. The second part that we see that is very important is how we develop policies that accompany this, that go along with this transformation process. The third one that we believe is a priority is how we improve and prepare our institutions for this change, how we prepare public officers, but as well the whole transport sector, to have a real proposal to bring to the table to have the discussion on climate change and transport. And third, and fourth, and not less important, is how we work with partnership with public society, with the private sector, but as well with the academia and the civil society. These for us should be dividing between actions that we can take in the short term, medium term, and long term to really reroute this trend for 2050. And what we're doing from the Inter-American Development Bank and as well working with the World Bank and other institutions is first, we're working 4 pillars, working in best urban transport and getting and develop more alternatives for a sustainable urban transport. And this is, I mean, we could have a whole meeting about how we can do this better. And of course, you experts, you all know that this is a multifactorial agenda, that not just by developing more public transport, we need finance, we need electromobility, we need a lot of factors for this to happen, but this is one of our main priorities at the bank. The second agenda is how we reduce the carbon footprint of the sector and how we work in different actions like nature-based solutions, project life cycle, to make transport sector like cleaner or greener. The third one is resilience. And avoid to say, I jumped that slide, sorry, Agustina, but one of the most important things is not just about climate change and emissions, but as well the effect that has on the resilience and the effect that has on our infrastructure. That's something that Latin America and the Caribbean is getting really impacted, and where we see more demand from our governments and clients say, well, don't ask me too much to mitigate, help me to embrace the changes and act on the changes that climate change is bringing to the infrastructure of the region and the losses and the effect that has on the most vulnerable population. And the fourth one is technology. And of course, we see technology as the real game changer that will help the sector to leapfrog and take real actions and result on these 4 dimensions. So these are some of the recommendations that we have in the flagship report. You can download and look at the report in more detail. And to talk about this topic, we have brought many 4 really important guests, which some of them have been our partners in developing this publication. So I would like to welcome our panelists, Minister Munoz. Chile has been like a leader in the climate change agenda in the region, so that's why we're very interested in bringing his perspective to this panel. Mohamed Mengazi from the UITP, our partners on developing this report, but in general, the urban transport agenda. Stephen Perkins from the International Transport Forum, which we've been developing a very important partnership, especially on policy and transport policy across the region. And Susana Samataro, that couldn't join us here, but that with the International Road Federation, who we've been working together on how we can change this agenda for the road sector. So let me welcome you to the panel, and now I'm going to change this microphone and welcome you all here today. And I try to be very brief in the report because I'm very interested on hearing about your perspectives and how you from your institutions are moving this agenda. And I would like to start with Stephen, giving you international perspective, world perspective from the ITF. And I would like to hear your views on how is Latin America and the Caribbean, or how you see Latin America and the Caribbean in that way to meet the Paris alignment goals compared with other regions in the world.
Okay, thank
Welcome.
you, Anna Maria, and good morning, everybody. I think the first thing to repeat is the urgency of action. And as Jürgen Vogler said just before the break, we're headed to overshoot the 1.5 degree warming if we take urgent action across the globe, including in the transport sector. We might make 2%, but as John Kerry said in his last speech as climate ambassador, it's looking more like 4 degrees if we don't really get our act together. So I think that's the significance and the importance of the report that the IDB released just a couple of months ago in getting attention to putting climate change mitigation at the top of every transport minister's agenda in the region. And transport, like all the other sectors, is aiming to decarbonize principally through electrification and dependent on renewable energy production. But on its own, electrification is simply not going to make it to get anywhere near the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. It needs, above all, reducing dependency on the car. and it means moderating growth in all countries in car use. All the countries in the regions are still headed towards increasing use of the car. So it means managing car traffic. It means more active mobility in safer street and road environments. And it needs more people carried by better quality public transport with networks reaching more of the population in peripheral as well as the central areas. And this requires better organization of concessions, public transport concessions for investment, including in electrification, for professionalization of working conditions, improvement of quality of service and reliability of service. So you'll take that forward, I'm sure, Mohammed. And it also means safe environments for walking and cycling. And I think in the region, there are at least two very positive points for governments across Latin America. The first is a strength of policy making in the so-called traditional areas for Latin American transport ministries of equitable accessibility and safety, for safety for pedestrians, cyclists, for the people that have much less access to using cars. And interventions to make mobility more equitable and to make roads safe is exactly in line with what we need to decarbonize the sector. And then the second is the wealth of experience in Latin America in delivering the investment that's needed. Minister Munoz is definitely going to talk about electrification of buses, I'm sure. But Santiago is not the only place in Latin America. Of course, one of the very first was Bogota, with their big investment around BRT and the Transmilenio project, which really addressed the problems across the board, exactly the way that Juan Carlos was talking about this morning, in building for more integrated transport and land use planning, transport-orientated development built around the BRT network, and ensuring the very crucial part that the public transport is affordable as well as sustainable in financial terms. And as you know, they did extensive concession reform to get the existing informal public transport operators on board, involved in setting up the BRT system. That was important. On the fare side, the linkage of support for fares, the subsidies for concessional fares, linking it to the social security system through the CISPEN system, that means that your card pass for using public transport is subsidized according to your qualification for getting support for the lowest or most of the low income population. Of course, some people escape that system entirely, some of the informal settlements, but it does a very good job of making the most of the subsidy that's available. And it's a lesson for the whole world, not just for Latin America, how you reconcile providing affordable fares without blowing the public budget for trying to provide that support in the times of financial stringency and crisis, which we're experiencing everywhere.
Thank you, Stephen. And that's interesting how you see from the worldwide perspective how Latin America is doing. And I think we got good examples, but the challenge is how we really mainstream this and get the real practical results that we need. And that's why, Minister Munoz, I would like to pass to you and maybe you, I mean, Chile has been, as I say, a leading force on this and an example for many countries on how you embracing climate change. And I would like us, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what are the goals that Chile had set for that 2050 or 2030, and then to get to 2050 emissions.
Thank you very much. Well, just as a complement to what I was mentioning before, of course, the crisis is there, and the transport sector has been probably one of the most stubborn in terms of reducing the emissions and going aligned with the rest of the efforts the rest of the industries are doing. And forbid me my academic background, but I would like to model in some way here the emissions out of transport on cities based on a specific formula. It's going to be 5 terms. So the emissions of a country will depend on, or of a city, on how many people live in the city. Double the city, the inhabitants, probably double the emissions. Multiplied by how many trips each of us do. You do the double of trips, double the emissions. And then telecommuting was kind of nice. That's something we learned in the pandemic. Third would be, how long are those trips? How many kilometers? Double the kilometers, double the emissions. So it's interesting. That's something we could also work on. Make your trips shorter. For how much energy per kilometer? Are you going to be moving a super big car? Are you going to be walking? Are you going to be taking a bike? How much energy do you need for each of those trips? Fifth, and this is multiplication. Fifth, how many carbon emissions per unit of energy? And that's only then when electromobility really enters in the equation, on the emissions of the last term. And I think it's important that we take a look at the fifth factors. Because if I say, what do you prefer? Turn 10% of your cars into electric, or make public transport more affordable and convenient and drift 10% of your car trips into public transport, or make a wonderful path of for bikes so that 10% of your cars move into bikes, or maybe move some people from the periphery into areas that are better located and the distances will be shorter. All of them may have the same impact. Notice that the last one may at the same time allow you to foster public transport and bike use and walk if your cities are more compact. So I think it's important that we have that framework and not just the framework of, oh, we need to turn into electromobility, because we might be losing the opportunity to solve other problems at the same time. What are we doing in Chile? We have put some goals, like 2050, we want to be carbon neutral. 2035, all new vehicles, cars or buses must be carbon neutral. And by 2040, all our buses must be operating already, are expected to be electric or non-emissions. And notice that for 2040, all your buses to be electric or with no carbon emissions, like 12 years in advance, you need also to only be incorporating vehicles that are carbon neutral. So what we're doing is what we have started by putting our focus in those transport modes that are more cost effectively to change into low emissions. And that's why we have fostered buses and trains. We're very proud to say that our city is the city outside from China with more electric buses in the world. We have 2,500 and growing. And we expect that to reach eventually not only 100%, but also to start with the rest of the country. Now, one of the cities in the north already have electric buses, and we expect during this year to see this trend expand. So, and I also think that we should try to foster probably bikes and electric bikes. I think is very important. I think as a low-hanging fruit in terms of a not that heavy investment to change people from car into a mode where they will also feel that they're making a little bit of exercise. I think that's also an opportunity. And we also, I think, shouldn't forget freight. And our country is really blessed in terms of the opportunities for clean fuels. We not only have the desert with amazing opportunities for wind, and for solar, and the south for wind, is the country probably with best opportunities to produce green hydrogen. And that's something that we're fostering, and it's a national plan where we expect that to develop a great industry that will at the same time be able to provide green fuels to the rest of the world. And we're also working now in a new law that will foster maritime freight within Chile. It's silly, as you may not believe this, but a country as maritime as Chile, the freight that is moved by truck is like 96% of the freight, and very little is moved by the sea. And that's something we would like to improve so that the carbon emissions of the freight also drops.
Thank you, Minister Muñoz. And it's really interesting how you in Chile are converging Ministry of Transport, Energy, and of course Treasury talking about this all together in a common agenda. I think that to me, amongst all the things that you're doing, very important lesson from the institutional point of view, where Transport and Energy are working together, as well with Treasury or Finance, because that's, to us, the only way that they can really take the power to change that you're talking about. And then we have talked a lot about the urban sector, or the urban transport. And I think as important is what we're doing to make our roads greener and that transition. We're talking about cargo and interurban transport. And that's why Susana is here. And Susana, I know the road sector sometimes is seen as the villain and that's something that we will changing. So on the international agenda that you are representing so successfully, could you tell us how the road sector is setting goals or transforming into mitigating GHG emissions?
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. I hope you can hear me well. Greetings to all of you, those sitting in Washington, and I'm jealous because I can't be with you. So all those are watching like me on remote. And let me say a big thank you to IADB for giving us a chance to contribute to the report, and today as well to share our views, the views of a federation that has been working on the sector since 1948, 75 years, bringing knowledge and expertise, facilitating and fostering partnerships, and working on policy and advocacy with many of the people in the room, let alone those on the stage. So my greetings to the other speakers. Your question is, how is the road sector moving forward in terms of mitigation? You saw me nodding quite a bit when both the minister and Steve were talking, and I have to say we have summarized our views in a joint statement that we brought to the COP together with a number of what we call sisters organizations. And the first message in there was what you heard from the previous two speakers. Attention, the electrification will not solve it all. And even the best, but most realistic scenarios of modal shift, for example, towards rail, of both people and freight, the minister was correct. We need to talk about freight as well, prove that this will still not be sufficient to reach the targets we have set in the Paris Agreement. Do we have to do it? Yes, of course, we need to keep going and to keep doing, but there's a lot more that needs to happen beside electrification and the modal shift. Let's not forget that we are all trying to collectively build together an efficient multimodal transport system and services. I was very happy to hear some of the speakers talking about services. And what needs to happen is that while we are building up these multimodal options, we still need to decarbonize drastically, I would say, the road sector, but without compromising the services that we provide, and without, let's not forget, undermine a sector that serves all other modes of transport, including active mobility and public transport. Roads don't mean necessarily only cars. There's a lot more that happens on our roads. So how do we do that? I would say, being infrastructure people, at least our DNA is infrastructure, start as well by rethinking infrastructure too, while you're talking about vehicles and electrification, optimizing infrastructure that we already have, repurposing infrastructure, and modernizing infrastructure is actually fundamental. I was having this morning a conversation with the authorities and operators of highways in Italy. That network is 100 years old, highways network in Italy. Imagine the challenge now to modernize that network. And in all this setting, digitalization for us is one of the greatest game changer in our sector. And this is not just about using technology to manage better our assets or more efficiently. This means for countries, especially those in Latin America, who still have to build their own network, means having the chance to do so, because some network still needs to be constructed, but being able to do so by cutting the carbon footprint, sometimes also by half. And I'll give you an example for that. Roads are a very material intensive type of sector, and that materials impact 60% of the cost of an infrastructure project, and also 85% of the carbon footprint. And so optimizing material is key, is a key lever to decarbonize road networks, both during construction, but also during the maintenance phases. The second solution from our perspective, beside the digitalization and electrification, of course, is also promoting fuel efficiency and all those fuel mixes, as some of the speakers mentioned as well. And last but not least, incentivize not only shift to public transport, and Mohammed in the panel will be happy to hear me say that, or rail, and I salute here Francois from UIC, but also much more sustainable behaviors and the management of logistics, when those type of behaviors and logistics imply a type of mobility that ends up being on a motor vehicle on a road. So my point is we do have solutions today, not tomorrow, but today. And so what we need as a sector is that we need the policies and procurement processes that we don't speak too much about that support this type of solutions, the uptake of these solutions, if we really want to change the scale and pace of this important tradition. I'll stop here. I'm hoping we'll have a chance to come back on the resilience and adaptation, because it's also a key element in all this equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Susanna. And yeah, very important to follow the agenda and how we can build better as well, no? Our roads and the whole project cycle that we were talking about at the beginning. And now move to Mohammed. And Minister Munoz and Stephen talk about urban transport and how we should prioritize. But you that are a closer growth, looking at what cities are doing, and the big challenge that we had after COVID of losing much of at least 20 or more % of the users of the transport sector of the public transport systems. The question for you will be, why are you advising governments or cities, where should they invest? Where should be those priorities for them for improving the mobility in the cities and the urban transport systems, given all this context of what's happening?
Thank you, Anna Maria, and congratulations for the report. And we were very happy to collaborate in that report. So congratulations to you, to Augustina, and the whole team. Of course, the report has presented or analyzed the different countries, the 26 countries. And when we look to the 26 countries in Latin America, we see there are 19 countries that have included transport in their climate plans. 19 countries. And amongst those 19 countries, there are only 2 countries which have clearly set goals to reduce transport emissions by 2030. These are Belize and Trinidad and Tobago. But there is nothing different from the global situation, actually. I mean, it's not specificity in Latin America that transport, and especially public transport, is not enough on the agenda, is not enough mentioned as part of the solution to reduce emissions by 2030 and beyond. We have analyzed in UITP the 193 NDCs reports, and only there are 165 who have included transport in their climate plans, and 2/3 of them. Sorry, 165 reports in total that were ready, and 2/3 of them have included transport. And 70% of these 2/3 have included public transport. That public transport is part of the solution. Means about 50% of the reports in total, they have public transport. But almost all of them, they focus on technology. I mean, when they speak about public transport, they speak about electrification. Of course, I mean, electrification is important, and it was said here, but it's not with electrification that we are going to improve the mobility conditions of people. Last year, in this same event, I said something that many people have reminded me this year. I said I prefer a diesel bus in an exclusive lane rather than an electric bus stuck in traffic. And I still believe the same, because an electric bus in traffic will not attract more people. And this is what if we want really to decarbonize, we need to decarbonize by having a comprehensive approach, which is decarbonizing by also improving the mobility conditions, reducing congestion, improving road safety, improving social inclusion, improving health. So that's how we can decarbonize, and not just decarbonize because we are, at the end, will we be happy if we have a congestion, a clean congestion, I would say, zero emission congestion? I don't think people will be happy to have to be in a zero emission congestion. So what we need is really to make sure the mobility is better for everyone, and for that, I would say we need to go back to the basics. The avoid, shift, improve is still valid. It's more than ever. Minister Munoz, in the previous session, he insisted on the density. That density is an important factor if we want to decarbonize, and it answers the avoid pillar, because if we have a high density, we will move on shorter distances, or we will not move as much as we will move in a low density area, etc., etc. So it's important that we remind that, and then the shift. I mean. We need to make sure the road is shared based on the efficiency of each mode, based on the number of people we can move, and not based on the number of vehicles we will move. So these are basics. I mean, I'm not inventing anything, but it's important that we go back to these basics. And if there is a reason that we say avoid, shift, improve is the third pillar, is not the first one. And in your report, you presented that the technology measures, you presented them in the fourth. There are 4 blocks, and technology was the fourth one. And I don't think it's by chance that it was there fourth, but it is. I mean, technology should come after policies, after the institutional improvement. And when we speak about technology, we speak a lot about electrification, actually. And when we speak about electrification, we all focus on buses. But I would like to remind that rail is electric, of course, and rail. In some cities, give you one example. In Vienna, 80% of public transport, of people traveling on public transport, they travel on electric modes. So we should not forget. I mean, the focus on electrification is not just about buses, and also the focus on electrification should not divert us from the main issue we have, which is how to make mobility better for everyone. Thank
you, Mohammed. And talking about that, because you were talking about practical solutions, and I think we were talking yesterday with the Secretary General of SLOCAT of how to move to take this decade with take the actions at the global level, but as well at the practical level, at the local level, and don't get discussing too much about where we should go, but start acting, and that's why I would like to ask Minister Munoz, what actions, specific actions you see to move beyond, the rhetoric or the discussions to really improve urban mobility and sustainable transport in our cities?
Yeah, well, these are difficult problems. I mean, it's very hard to get a solution or a certain step that will allow us to solve this problem. But I think that we should realize that we need to take every single action that will take us in the right path. The first thing I think is that, especially we're talking about cities, and cities are compact, dense places that we use to live together. And therefore, public transport should be the first one in our list. A vehicle that we share, a vehicle that therefore will have less energy, less emissions per capita, and that should allow us to move around the city. And we have, I think that one of the key issues here is that public transport shouldn't be the choice of someone that doesn't have an alternative, but the choice of everyone. That to really make it, that should be like the right choice because it's more convenient. And I think that the quality of service is key. In the case of Santiago, the effort we have made in moving towards electric buses have been, I think, very successful. Recently, we have seen demand growing and people grading the service they receive as good as they have ever. We grade in Chile from 1 to 7, and our system before the electric buses was 4.5, 4.6, and now it's 5.5. It's very important improvement, and we feel that electric buses and our metro and fare integration and the facility of paying has all been involved in people in Santiago, even though we have a terrible start. To realize they have a public transport that is reasonable, even though we still receive thousands of complaints, of course. I think it's very important that we can, as authority, also inspire people that the transport choices that we are trying to promote are the ones we also take. I think that's relevant, and I think that's something that might also allow us to speak with more confidence and more trust when you're talking about the system you actually use. I think it's important also that we allocate road space. I totally agree with what Mohamed just said. I prefer a diesel bus on a bus lane than an electric bus stuck in traffic. And I think that we need, therefore, to think about how do we allocate road space, how much space have we allocated already for cars, and that's kind of the elephant in the room. That very few of us would really like to face and to take action towards probably making car actually less attractive. People will say, oh, no, you should make public transport or bikes more attractive, but don't touch the car. Why would you? And I think in this case, since we have a given capacity of the urban roads, if we don't do that, probably we won't be able to address the problem fully. I think it's important also to work on affordability. For a lot of people, public transport is still too expensive to move around. And that, of course, creates anger towards the system, anger towards the city. And I think that every effort we can make to make public transport not only better quality, but at the same time affordable for everyone, it's great. We have had a good experience with this idea of a cap on the amount of money that people pay per month if they use the QR code, which you pay for every trip. You don't have to pay in advance at the beginning of the month. But once you reach a certain threshold, all your trips are free. And I think that's something that we could be moving ahead as a policy. Also, maybe the fare could be, now that we have, but that's something I haven't thought more. Maybe the fare could be space specific. Maybe in some neighborhoods that are low income neighborhoods, maybe because you pay with a card, people know where you are. The fare might be cheaper. So I think we need to be innovative in terms of making public transport fare more affordable. We're working also in expanding our metro. This is something we do permanently in Santiago, but we don't do in other cities because they're smaller, and something that we're thinking of. Our metro has a great quality and people love it. But I think it wouldn't be as successful if it wasn't fare integrated with the buses. So that's something that is also part, I think, of the success of the metro system in Santiago. So I think that's my point.
Thank you, Minister. And you talk about a very important topic that sometimes is overlooked. Is about medium and small size cities and what we do in there, because there we don't have the metros and maybe we don't have the technology or the investment or the priorities. And that's why, Steve, going back to you, where are we going with the small and medium sized cities? What good examples you see elsewhere or in the region of how promoting greener urban mobility in this segment?
Okay, thanks. It's going to be unfair to pick out just one or two, but I think I'm going to be stopped before I get beyond that because of time.
We're going to have some more minutes, but yeah, please be brief.
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of good examples, right down to really small towns in the mountains where safe routes to schools are putting in pavements on roads that don't have them, so that people can actually, kids can actually walk to school, often unaccompanied, and they don't have to try and do it by some other means on the back of a motorbike or something that is supposed to be safer. But if we just take it down, the next level down for cities, there's a pretty impressive example in Mexico in the Guadalajara Zapopan conurbation, which it's still 5 million people, but it's only a fifth the size of Mexico City. So it's the next layer down, where they've done pretty much all of the things that Mexico City are doing in terms of equitable and safe accessibility and investment in public transport and so on. But I think they've achieved more in the time that they've been working on this. And this includes professionalization of the private bus and microbus operators, improvement in the government control of their concessions in terms of routing, quality of service, frequency. They've done a complete reorganization of bus routes, the implementation of an electronic bus payment system, which opens up the kind of possibilities that Juan Carlos was just talking about. They've renewed 2/3 of the bus fleet, and they operate the first 100% electric bus line in all of Mexico. They've got the longest, busiest BRT line in all of Mexico. They've got, I think, probably still the most recent investment in their third light rail line, which is serving the conurbation. Their reallocation of space from the private car to public transport and active mobility is really striking in all of the central parts of the different cities in the conurbation. And so's the shared public bike system with bike lanes linking between the centers, and I've used them. They're really good, and they go to the places you need to go to, not just in the very central parts. But I think the most successful thing they've done is, which is very politically difficult, or has proved to be very politically difficult in a lot of other cities, including the capitals in the region, is following on for the discussion yesterday of the very central part of safe speeds in urban areas. They've put in a series, a wide network of automated speed control cameras that are very with automated fines being issued, which are actually collected, enforceable, and it's proving successful in controlling speeds. And it's also generated a large amount of income that is used for a big investment in road safety, in treating the streets in the city. So I got stopped. So that's just one example.
Thank you. And I promised that we were going to make up some of the time that we lost. So Mohammed and Susanna, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I'm sorry, but I don't want to not talk about resilience and how we are lots. I mean, the lots of the attention is into mitigation and not so much about resilience and adaptation. And our region is one of the most affected in the world, and our road infrastructure as well. So, Susanna, what are the main changes in road operations that we should be needing to reduce risk of disruptions?
Thank you, Ana Maria. I hope you can still hear me well. Yes, it's a pity we don't have more time. I wanted to say pragmatism. I mean, local context is also extremely important. I'm referring to the conversation you just finished Italy, it's a G7 country. 36% of the population, only 36% of the population lives in the metropolitan areas. 60% lives in cities with 50,000, so small or medium cities. So we don't need to forget context when we have these kind of conversations. Now, quickly rushing to your question, and thank you for that, about adaptation. I think we talk a lot about adaptation, but we're still not nailing it down properly. And and this is exemplified by what you see already on the news. We tend to still have that reactive approach rather than a proactive one. So we talk about adaptation and disasters only when they happen. And so here we need to address the other elephant in the room, maintenance. We need to bring the debate back at the center on maintenance, because maintenance is the best actually tool that we have to really prepare for what is awaiting us. Let's not forget as well that you cannot speak about adaptation in isolation, road adaptation or rail adaptation. We are a system, and we should be embracing this system thinking. I think the COVID has demonstrated really well. So we need to make sure that all the bits and pieces of the system function properly, so that if we have a failure in one of the parts, it could be the road network because it's flooded, then we have chances to step on something else. And that means as well making sure that we take care of the secondary network. When there's investment that goes for adaptation, we always spend it in the big highways on the arteria because there's a lot of traffic. But if you don't have a secondary network that is up and running and is suitable, if you have disruptions, you won't be able to function either. And the final point, since the time is so limited, it's about getting a good understanding and managing well your assets. In this respect, I bring back again the point on digitalization. Digitalization makes wonders for us, because with digital twins, we can simulate and model things before they happen. And so it means we can save money, we can reinvest money in other pieces of infrastructure. Coordination mechanism, fundamental. And then yes, and skills of people. I was happy to hear in the previous session about the importance of, making sure that the workforce who has to deliver has the skills to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susana. And lastly, but no, I was going to speak Spanish. Sorry. To finish, Mohammed, why? When we're talking about electromobility in cities as well as green transition, we talk about mitigation but no adaptation. And what we found in many cities that we work in is that if we don't have an infrastructure, an urban infrastructure that is suitable, for example, for electromobility, we're not going to be able to operate electric buses. So why do you think we are not looking at the two sides, mitigation and adaptation, as a policy or as important as both themes are?
Sure, both themes are very important, but we must recognize that adaptation is a new concept. It's a new concept, and it takes time to integrate it into planning studies, into the processes, into contracts, into engineering, etc. So we are talking now about adaptation, about the need to have an infrastructure which is adapted to this climate change. But it's relatively a new concept, and it explains some of it's one of the reasons, I would say, why it is not there yet. And also some cities, they still need to mature their understanding of adaptation. They need maybe more capacity to build capacity about climate change adaptation. There is also a lack of evidence or lack of data in that field, because if it's a new concept, that we are missing some data showing that when we integrate this adaptation into the design of the infrastructure, it comes with positive impact. And also one last aspect is that since we are lacking data, since it's a new, relatively new concept, we are struggling to get buy-in from the policymakers because they prefer to, let's say, cut the ribbon of a new bus fleet rather than investing or in a climate monitoring system, I would say. So it's important that now with the different examples that we start to emerge, I would say, it will be easier to convince them. And also, it's important to remind that the cost of disaster recovery can be mitigated by 70% if we use adaptation measures. So I would say we are on the good track, but we still need to build capacity, to increase awareness of the policymakers, and to show some concrete examples, tangible examples about the added value of adaptation.
Thank you, and I hope next year we can bring some of those specific and concrete examples and hopefully results. I'm sorry we didn't have time for the last question, but I think a very, very good and interesting discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, for being here with us this hour, and a big clap to big applause to the panelists. Thank you. Thank you, Susana.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now, I think we're going to have a luncheon. I don't know, you have something to project here. So we invite everyone to join. Anyway, I think I had something to say, but it's not there. Yeah, please, go ahead. So I invite everyone to go somewhere that is going to be on the screen. Yeah? Okay, thank you.